This morning, the news hit like a hammer. The NFA language has been stripped out of the bill. Just before 1 o'clock, the Senate Parliamentarian handed down a decision that knocked the wind out of what many were calling one of the most promising legislative pushes in recent years for Second Amendment rights. Gone is the progress, for now. And with it, a great deal of hope for reform that was already long overdue. The removal wasn't dramatic. There were no floor fights, no televised debates. It was silent, bureaucratic, and surgical. One decision behind closed doors, and the entire NFA provision vanished from the bill. That's how this system works, or rather, how it fails. For those following closely, this was more than a policy shift. It was another example of procedural control taking precedence over public will. The frustration is real, and it's growing. But this isn't about rage. It's about resolve. Understanding what happened, why it matters, and what comes next is essential. Because while this was a major blow, it's not the end of the line. Let's walk through what was at stake, why the National Firearms Act still holds such controversial weight nearly a century after its passage, and how a single decision from a non-elected official can undo years of advocacy in minutes. For nearly a century, the National Firearms Act has been a constant thorn in the side of lawful gun owners. It was built for a different time, driven by a different fear, and yet here we are, still tangled in the red tape it left behind. It hasn't adapted. It hasn't been modernized. It's just sat there, decade after decade, dragging down those of us who follow the rules and ask nothing more than to be treated like citizens, not suspects. What is the worst part? Everyone knows it. They know how long it takes to get a suppressor approved. They know the ridiculous hoops people jump through for a short-barreled rifle. They know how a simple barrel length can turn into a months-long federal ordeal. And it's not stopping criminals. It's burdening the law-abiding. The language that just got cut from the bill would have started to change that. It wasn't radical. It wasn't reckless. It was targeted, deliberate reform, meant to peel back just a layer of the bureaucracy choking responsible ownership. And yet, it couldn't even survive a review by someone who doesn't have to answer to a single voter. There was hope. Not naive hope, but practical hope. Finally, a chance to move the needle without needing 60 votes. This wasn't about blowing the system up. It was about loosening a few of the most absurd, outdated constraints, about treating modern gun owners like adults, not liabilities. But once again, the structure held, not because it made sense, not because it was right, but because that's how these systems are designed, to protect themselves from change, especially when that change benefits people who have been told again and again to sit down and wait their turn. And now, once again, we're left standing on the sidelines, watching the system buy itself more time while telling us, in no uncertain terms, to stay patient, stay quiet, and stay in line. I wish I could say I was surprised. I really do. But anyone who's been paying attention to how things get done, or don't, in Washington, knows how this game plays out. The Senate Parliamentarian, someone you've probably never voted for or even heard speak in public, just made a decision that threw months of work straight into the trash. One call, no public debate, no floor vote, just a quiet ruling behind closed doors. And poof, the NFA language is out. Now, I've got nothing personal against the parliamentarian. She's doing what her job description tells her to do, interpret Senate rules. But let's be honest here. This job carries way more weight than it ever should. When a single staffer, because that's what she is at the end of the day, a staffer can decide what stays and what gets killed in a national bill, we've got a real problem with accountability. And let me be clear, this wasn't about safety or public interest. This was about procedure, about whether the words on the page fit into the narrow little box labeled reconciliation. Doesn't matter if the change made sense. Doesn't matter if the majority supported it. Doesn't even matter if the public wanted it. If it doesn't fit that box, the ruling is final. No appeal. People ask why nothing ever gets done. Well, here's your answer. This is the bottleneck. This is why change takes forever. You can have momentum. You can have public support. You can have all the right language and still hit a brick wall made of invisible rules and unelected power. So yeah, I'm frustrated. Because we've been here before. Minimum wage, immigration, prescription drug reform. Time and again, big pieces of legislation have been gutted by technical rulings from people no one voted for. And every time, we're told, that's just how it works. Maybe that's true, but it doesn't make it right. Right after I got word that the language had been pulled, my phone lit up with texts from folks on the Hill, people who've been in the trenches on this. And what I heard, over and over, wasn't panic. It was strategy. These are people who've been punched in the mouth before. They don't cry about it. They wipe the blood and look for another opening. The truth is, no one thought this would be easy. The reconciliation route was a gamble, a high-reward play that relied on threading the needle. And now that it's off the table, well, we adapt. There are still ways to move this forward. I'm hearing talk of reframing the language to tie it directly to federal spending, maybe highlighting the cost of redundant NFA enforcement or the backlog at the ATF. If they can make that connection stick, there's a chance to get the language reconsidered under the same process. But honestly, I think the smarter money might be on breaking it up. Small, surgical moves instead of one giant push. Attach parts of the reform to budget bills. Slip them into defense funding. Let them ride shotgun on legislation that leadership can't afford to let stall. It's not glamorous. It won't get headlines. But if it chips away at the mountain, I'm all for it. The important thing now is not to let this moment die. We've got attention. We've got awareness. If we go quiet now, the folks in charge will assume we've moved on, and they'll move on too. That's how they win. Delay until we stop caring. But that's not happening. Not this time. In the hours after the news broke, you could practically feel the energy shift online. On AR-15. The NFA subforum lit up with new threads, some people venting, some asking for updates, but a surprising number already discussing next moves. It wasn't just noise, it was planned, posts calling for coordinated pressure on Senate offices. Suggestions to pivot toward ATF accountability, people sharing templates for writing to state legislators about duplicative NFA restrictions. Over on Reddit, in our NFA and our firearms, the reaction followed a similar arc. Frustration, then focus. I saw one comment get over 1,000 upvotes in a matter of hours. It laid out, in plain terms, how to build state-level momentum for SBR and suppressor reform, even in the face of federal gridlock. That's not defeat. That's tactical thinking. It's the difference between venting and organizing. You could even feel it in the tone of the comments. Less noise, more intent. People weren't just letting off steam anymore. They were making sure the message stayed sharp, visible, and impossible to ignore. And that kind of clarity is what keeps this movement alive. I even saw the Firearms Policy Coalition put out a statement not long after the ruling came down. It didn't mince words. They called it yet another cowardly procedural dodge designed to protect broken institutions. They're already raising money and planning legal action, not necessarily tied to the bill itself, but to keep pressure on ATF's broader interpretation of the NFA. This isn't just background noise. This is a signal that people aren't letting it slide. In private Discord groups I'm part of, folks are already mapping out FOIA requests, brainstorming Pro-2A ballot initiatives, and discussing ways to bring more visibility to the insane backlog on Form 1 and Form 4 applications. That's the real heartbeat of this community. Not outrage, but action. You can feel the urgency, but also a kind of clarity. There's no illusion anymore that Washington is going to fix this out of goodwill. So people are turning inward, toward each other, toward local strategies, toward courts, and yes, toward culture. Because policy follows pressure, and pressure starts at the ground level. That's what's happening right now. And it's why I'm more convinced than ever that this moment, frustrating as it is, isn't a loss. It's a trigger. One that's waking people up and pulling them together in a way we haven't seen in a while. This moment isn't the end of anything. It's just a checkpoint. If you've been watching this play out, you already know what it means. The system won't hand us a win. We have to earn every inch of ground ourselves. They're counting on fatigue, on distraction, on people getting tired and letting it all fade. But that's not how we're wired. So don't let it fade. Keep the discussion going in your circles. Stay informed, and make sure this isn't just another story that quietly disappears. Because nothing changes if we stop paying attention. And they're counting on that. Thanks for taking the time to listen. and go through this with me. It means a lot to know we're not going through it alone. I'll keep sharing what matters. And I hope you'll be there for the next one. See you in the next video.